What if the truth about one of the most notorious scandals of our lifetime has been sitting in locked boxes the entire time? Names, documents, and testimonies that could topple reputations in banking, Hollywood, government, and even intelligence. Tonight on Capitol Hill, the fight to expose Jeffrey Epstein's hidden files exploded in a way that left Americans with more questions than answers. 4 shocking documents entered into the record tell a story no one in power seems willing to confront: whispers of intelligence ties, secret calendars with high-level meetings, and reports of at least 20 powerful men who victims say were directly involved.
Gentleman, yes, back.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous consent request.
Gentleman's recognized.
So I've got 4 documents I'd like to introduce into the record. The first one is Jeffrey Epstein's sick story played out for years in plain sight. And Acosta is quoted in here saying, "I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone." The second document is entitled, "What Epstein's Bodyguard Warned About His CIA Connections." The third document is from Fox Digital. It's titled, "Epstein's Private Calendar Reveals Planned Meetings with Obama Admin Official CIA Chief." And the last document is Wall Street Journal article that highlights Ehud Barak's 36 meetings with Jeffrey Epstein. He was the former Prime Minister of Israel and head of military intelligence for Israel. It may have held that title when he met Epstein, and then, yes.
Without objection, the gentleman will hold for a second. The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one UC request. This is Judge Engelmeyer's decision from August in U.S. versus Epstein, stating the government's 100,000 pages of Epstein files dwarfs the 70-odd pages of Epstein grand jury materials.
Without objection, the gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Patel, I watched some of your Senate hearing yesterday when Senator Kennedy asked you, "You've seen most of the files. Who, if anyone, did Epstein traffic these women to besides himself?" You replied, according to the transcript, "There is no credible information that he trafficked them to anyone else." You also said somewhere in the hearing and here today that the problem is that the case files are constrained by limited search warrants from 2006 to 2007, and that the non-prosecution agreement hamstrung future investigations. Those constraints only apply to Southern District of Florida. They do not apply to Southern District of New York, the location of the 2019 sex trafficking indictment, which produced many things, including a series of FD 302 documents. According to victims who cooperated with the FBI in that investigation, these documents in FBI possession, your possession, detail at least 20 men, including Mr. Jess Staley, CEO of Barclays Bank, who Jeffrey Epstein trafficked victims to, victims including minors, such as Virginia Roberts Giuffre, may she rest in peace. That list also includes at least 19 other individuals, one Hollywood producer worth a few $100 million, one royal prince, one high-profile individual in the music industry, one very prominent banker, one high-profile government official, one high-profile former politician, one owner of a car company in Italy, one rock star, one magician, at least 6 billionaires, including a billionaire from Canada. We know these people exist in the FBI files, the files that you control. I don't know exactly who they are, but the FBI does. Have you launched any investigations into any of these people, and have you seen these 302 documents?
Sir, I have asked my FBI agents to review the entirety of the Epstein files and bring forth any credible information. And we're working with Congress not only to divulge that information and produce it to you, but any investigations that arise from any credible investigation will be brought. There have been no new materials brought to me launching a new indictment.
So is the loophole here, or is it your assertion that these victims aren't credible, that the 302s maybe didn't produce credible statements that rise to a probable cause?
It's not my assertion, sir. It's the assertion of 2 different United States attorneys' offices from 3 separate administrations who investigated those same materials in lifetime.
Are the 302 documents in the FBI's possession?
They reviewed all that, yes, sir.
And so have you reviewed those 302 documents where the victims name the people who victimized them?
If I personally know, but the FBI has.
So how can you sit here and in front of the Senate and say there are no names?
I said all
I named one
information-
today.
I said we are not in the practice at the Department of Justice and FBI of releasing victims' names. That is not what we do. We are also not in the habit of releasing incredible information. That's not what we do. But multiple authorities have looked at the entirety of what we have.
Okay, I got to move on here. Were you present when the AG had the White House event when she released the binders to the social media influencers?
I was, yes.
So if you're willing to meet with social media influencers who stood to benefit from the sensational and sad stories of these victims, will you meet with the victims as well?
The FBI will meet with anyone who has new information.
Will you personally meet with them?
The FBI and the professionals who are handling the cases will.
Were you instructed that it was important to release the documents to the Oversight Committee on the day of my introduction of the discharge petition to release these files?
I don't know what day that was, so no.
Well, they were released that day, and there were victims' names who weren't redacted because they were in such a rush, and the victims are not happy about that. Have you investigated any of the CIA connections? Have you seen the CIA file on Jeffrey Epstein? And if you wanted to see it, would they show it to you?
Well, I can speak for the FBI, and that's presuming there's a CIA case file, and I've reviewed everything that the interagency, not I, the FBI, that was provided to us.
Would you be willing to look at the CIA file on Jeffrey Epstein?
If there is such a file, and if it has not already been turned over to the FBI will look at any new investigative leads.
Have you made any progress on the pipe bomb investigation January 6th? And have you made any progress on the motive of the Las Vegas shooter?
As to the first, it's an ongoing investigation, and we have made progress. As to the second, sir, I'll have to get back to you.
All right, thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I have a unanimous
Gentleman
consent
yields back.
request.
Unanimous consent request from the gentleman from New York.
I ask unanimous consent to introduce an unsigned memorandum from July 7th, 2025 that says we did not uncover evidence that could predicate an investigation against uncharged third parties with the insignia of the Department of Justice and the FBI.
Without objection.
And yet the people meant to protect us insist there's no credible information. That single word credible has become the flashpoint of a debate that could decide whether truth is revealed or buried forever. So the question is, why are victims being dismissed, and who benefits from keeping the files hidden? The first crack in the facade came with a document bluntly titled Jeffrey Epstein's Sick Story Played Out for Years in Plain Sight. Buried inside is a quote that sends chills. I was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. That wasn't rumor whispered in a tabloid, it was a statement attributed to a U.S. official, suggesting Epstein's crimes weren't just tolerated but possibly shielded because of who he was connected to. If that's true, then the scandal isn't just about one man, it's about how power protects itself at the expense of victims. And it gets worse. Another record introduced was titled What Epstein's Bodyguard Warned About His CIA Connections. Think about that. His own bodyguard, one of the few people who saw his movements up close, felt compelled to warn that the man he was protecting had ties reaching into the most secretive corners of government. Maybe it was paranoia, maybe it was fact, but here's the question that lingers. If the people closest to Epstein suspected intelligence involvement, why hasn't that possibility been fully investigated? Why do agencies dance around the question instead of confronting it? Then came the calendar. A Fox Digital report revealed entries from Epstein's private schedule, showing planned meetings with Obama-era officials and even a CIA chief. This wasn't speculation, it was written in his own records. A man already convicted of exploiting minors was keeping appointments with some of the most powerful figures in government and intelligence. Ask yourself, how could that happen without raising alarms? Were these meetings casual, coincidental, or part of something far more calculated? The public deserves an answer, but so far silence has been the only response. And if that weren't enough, the Wall Street Journal highlighted at least 36 meetings between Epstein and Ehud Barak, the former Prime Minister of Israel, and a former head of military intelligence. That's not an acquaintance, that's a pattern. And it's not just one meeting here or there, it's dozens. When a disgraced financier spends that much time with someone who once led a nation's intelligence service, questions don't just arise, they scream. Yet once again those questions are met with deflection, the narrative remains frozen in place. no credible information. That's where the congressional hearing grew tense. Congressman Thomas Massie pressed FBI Director Kash Patel, asking directly besides Epstein himself who were victims trafficked to. Patel's reply was blunt: there is no credible information that he trafficked them to anyone else. But then almost in the same breath he admitted the case files were constrained by narrow search warrants and a non-prosecution agreement dating back to 2008. Those limits, he said, tied investigators' hands. But here's the catch: those constraints only applied to Florida. The New York case in 2019 produced its own files, including FBI FD 302 witness reports where victims named at least 20 men. If those reports exist, and multiple sources say they do, how can the FBI claim there's no credible information? The word credible has become a shield. Victims risked everything to tell their stories, giving names to investigators. Yet instead of pursuing those leads, authorities point back to past prosecutors and say they didn't think it was strong enough. That may be legally defensible, but morally, it feels like another betrayal. Especially when the list of alleged names includes a Hollywood producer worth hundreds of millions, a royal prince, a prominent music figure, a billionaire banker, and at least half a dozen other ultra-wealthy individuals. These aren't faceless nobodies. They are elite figures who move in circles that shape culture, finance, and politics. To dismiss testimony about them as not credible without full public review sends a chilling message: if the accused are powerful enough, the truth never sees daylight. And here's the deeper context. Back in 2008, Epstein secured a secret non-prosecution agreement in Florida that didn't just protect him, it shielded unnamed co-conspirators. That deal was hidden from victims and the public. It wasn't just lenient, it was unprecedented. Years later, when Epstein was finally arrested again in New York, many assumed that loophole no longer mattered. After all, it applied to one jurisdiction, but during this hearing, lawmakers pointed out that prosecutors elsewhere should have been free to act. So why didn't they? Why did a deal in Florida paralyze justice across the country? Was it legal caution or deliberate inaction? Which brings us back to the intelligence angle. If documents entered into Congress claim Epstein was protected because he belonged to intelligence, what does that actually mean? Was he an asset? Was he gathering information on powerful people? Or was it simply a convenient excuse for law enforcement to back away from a politically radioactive case? The bodyguard's warnings, the calendar with CIA meetings, the repeated contacts with foreign intelligence leaders, all of it paints a picture that demands answers. And yet the FBI's director gave the vaguest possible response: he'd only look at a CIA file if it exists, and if it hasn't already been turned over. That's not transparency, that's wordplay. Meanwhile, the victims' accounts sit in those FD 302s, hidden behind the same walls of secrecy. Survivors cooperated with the FBI in 2019, naming the men they say exploited them. Those names are in federal possession. Members of Congress have asked, directly, if the FBI will pursue them. And the answer was essentially not unless we think it's credible. Imagine being a victim who braved the public shame of testifying, only to hear your experience labeled not credible by the very institutions sworn to protect you. That's not just discouraging, it's devastating. Even beyond Epstein, lawmakers pressed Patel on unrelated but equally unresolved cases: the motive behind the Las Vegas shooter in 2017 and the pipe bomb investigation from January 6. His answers? Non-committal, still open, still ongoing, still unclear. It reinforced a perception that the FBI is either unable or unwilling to close the country's darkest chapters. For Americans watching, it raised a larger fear: if the truth can be delayed forever, is it ever really meant to come out? And that's the heart of the issue. Transparency isn't just about justice for Epstein's victims, it's about restoring trust in institutions that appear far more concerned with protecting the powerful than serving the people. Every time officials say no credible information without showing the evidence, they fuel suspicion that the files are being suppressed, not for lack of evidence, but for lack of will. The American people know the difference between an investigation that hits a dead end and one that's never really allowed to begin. The victims named names, those names are locked away. The documents hint at intelligence protection, those files remain hidden. And each time questions are asked, we hear the same circular logic: prosecutors before didn't act, so why should we? That cycle guarantees silence, but silence isn't justice, it's complicity. This story is not finished, more hearings are expected, pressure on Congress is growing, and the question looming over everything is simple: who was Epstein really working for, and how far does the protection go? If even a fraction of what's in these documents is true, then the scandal we think we know is only the tip of something much darker. Because it's not just about one man's crimes, it's about the system that allowed them to continue unchecked for decades. And maybe that's why so many are invested in keeping the files sealed. Because if they ever see daylight, they could reveal not just the names of individuals, but the blueprint of how power, intelligence, and money intertwine, in ways most of us can barely imagine. It would be a revelation not just of personal guilt, but systemic rot. So here's where we are. 4 documents with explosive claims, a congressional hearing exposing the gap between victims' testimonies and official denials, a word credible that has become the firewall between truth and exposure, and a nation left wondering if the truth will ever be allowed to surface. The only certainty is this: as long as the files remain hidden, suspicion will grow, and every day without answers deepens the wound, not just for victims, but for anyone who believes in accountability. If you think transparency matters, if you believe survivors deserve justice no matter how powerful their abusers may be, then don't look away. Because this isn't just history, it's happening right now, behind closed doors, in files still locked from the public. The question is whether enough pressure can finally pry them open. Stay tuned, because this fight is far from over. More revelations are coming, more names may be forced into daylight, and the truth, however long it takes, has a way of finding its way out. If you care about accountability, if you want to see justice done, share this story, keep the pressure alive, and don't let the questions fade. And if you found this breakdown eye-opening, hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss the next chapter in a story that could reshape everything we thought we knew.